Hi, my name is Ken Assistant. This is the second one of a series of videos on the microbiome for autism. I'm a data scientist. I'm not a medical professional. I'm also a high function ASD, and the fact that I'm high function and have tunnel vision resulted in my creating a very good website and a fair amount of analysis on the microbiome, simply because I have pretty concentrated focus. Okay, today we're going to look at child autism of a particular child based on the findings of comparing published studies on the microbiome alterations in autism, as well as the citizen science one. And right down here at the bottom right is we have a short list of the bacteria which we're going to take a look at. The citizen science ones is basically a dynamic report, so every time somebody uploads the report and the contents of it is going to change. So sometimes things will appear or disappear or then reappear later, because it's all driven by available data, which is subject to change, which is nice because you always have the latest data. It can be confusing because something disappears on you. Okay, but let's skip over to that issue for the moment. We have just short list of bacteria out of 800 to 1200 possible ones, which we could get in a microbiome report. So let's take a look at it. So what we are going to do is we are going to go and look at the timelines of a variety of bacteria, seeing what pattern it is and see whether or not it matches that reported by citizen science or by published studies. Once we have gone through that, we're going to go back and just flip through the samples and see what the predicted symptoms were for each one of the samples. And then as a first step, we're going to take that information using these bacteria or the ones which turns out significant and see if we're getting suggestions to modify the population, to correct it, as in get it from being low into the normal range or from high down to the normal expected range. Okay, with that, let's hop over and take a look at our samples. Once you logged on to the microbiome analysis site, you will see all of the samples. In this particular case, we have 12 samples over 2 years of an autistic child, which gives us a beautiful hunk of data. I must give a special kudos to the mother who granted permission for us to use her daughter's data for the purposes of this discussion. What I'm going to talk about is uber specific, very, very specific about this child. Doesn't apply to every autistic child. What we are doing is we looked at the general pattern where things are likely to change, and now we're going to see whether or not that pattern applies to this specific child. And how do we do it? Well, we go and click compare samples to each other as shown here, which now gives a list of all of the samples. Samples must be processed through the same lab. You cannot use data from different labs directly back and forth. There are ways you can get around it, but basically it should be the same lab. In this case it is. We also have the mother's result, which we will come back to later. And down below we have a variety of charts, and I'm going to focus on my taxon timeline right here, which goes, and at the top you see the class or whatever rank it is, and then you see the names, and then you have a variety of presentation. And usually what happens is the top table shows what the counts are and what the counts, which one the 4 quarters of the population it says. For example, 1 means it's the bottom 25% of people who report this bacteria. 2 indicates in the 25 to 50 percentile, etc. Not every person will have a bacteria reported, and this is only dealing with comparisons to people who also report that this particular bacteria. If you have 0, it will be an NA, and there's statistical reason for going down this path, but for the moment that is not relevant. So let's go back and take a peek at all things. The first one we have is the family. So we change it up to family. And we go down to Sutrella. There, and we get the numbers. And what we see is that generally it's reported high. And what we find is, wait a minute, it's not high. This person doesn't match the pattern. Something else is happening. Her DNA may be particularly different, or her diet for handling autism may be different. There's some difference. So she is a non-pattern match, not that much of a concern, because not every single pattern will match every single child. Generally, people most necessarily work with averages. Averages will almost always include people whose values are above average of the healthy control group, which means that some people will not agree with being, quote, low. They actually may be different. So here we have one particular bacteria where we do not have agreement. Next one is Blottia, which is a genus. And we go down and we find Blottia. And there we have our numbers. And generally it's low. 1 and 2 indicates low, and the bacteria is generally low. We can now scroll down further and see how the numbers are changing over time. And you see that it's generally below the 25th percentile, hopped up for a short while above, and then slipped back down, going up and coming down. Average is in agreement with the published studies and also the science of being low. So in theory or conceptual theory, we would want to raise the level of the Blottia. The next one on the list is Bifidobacterium, and Bifidobacterium is what I call a split, as in some are high and some are low, and in this case the most common pattern is high, and what we find is a real odd pattern. Most of them are low, and then we have them going into the top 25%. So it seems to be what I call a volatile one, as in, and most of the time you notice the no dots means most of the time there was absolutely none. So there was absolutely none. Suddenly they appeared for a while, disappeared, appeared, disappeared, and now they seem to be coming back, and they are now sitting up somewhere in all approaching the top 90 percentile. So they are becoming high, very high in fact. So that is it is moving towards the standard match, but why was non-existent before is a question which may or may not be able to be answered. Next is Lactobacillus. And Lactobacillus is similar, is high in some sites and low. And if you look back at the numbers from the far on, you find that it's almost an identical match. Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus both increased at the same time. Otherwise, they were practically zero. So again, these two are volatile ones. Go down below, we actually have more points where Bifidobacteria had totally disappeared. In this case, it dropped down to the bottom 6 percentile or even the bottom 3 percentile for those who reported. And the rest of the time there were none, and now it's taking off considerably, and it is somewhere approaching the 90th percentile. So it's becoming a high amount. Villanella is the next one, which is again genus. And we have the reported characteristic being high, and we notice 4, 4, 3, 4, 4, 3, 4, 4, 4, 1, 2 in there, which means for 12 samples, this child was high for 11 of the 12 samples, so it's a match. The next one we could go down to is the sulfur bacteria. Just double check the spelling. Vibrio, not bacterium. Okay. Something you have to be careful of is spelling, because frequently they will be close to other words, and it's supposed to be low. We have absolutely none, and then we have very low. Again, we have agreement. And the last one is Sarcassia. And for Sarcassia, we discovered something. We don't have a single report of this bacteria in 12 samples. So it would appear to be in absolute agreement with being low. So what we have found is, apart from one item where we counter, we are in agreement with the others with an odd shift. For 2 of them, bifidobacteria and lactobacillus, we were low and then we were high, and that is somewhat in agreement with some studies reporting low and some studies reporting high. So it's sort of interesting that we have conflict between studies, and let into one particular person's timeline, we find that it actually matches back and forth. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is just flip through and look at the predicted symptoms. So I'm going to go back to change samples, and I'm going to look at the very first one. And probable symptoms use citizen science, because I have far more data available than from published studies to attempt to predict symptoms. So here is the oldest one from 2018, and number 1 is autism. 21 out of 27 patterns match, 0.89 predictor. We also have memory, fatigue, unrefreshing sleep, also showing up as characteristic. Fatigue often will manifest itself with a child as crankiness, irritability, and usually for numbers for predictions, we want very high numbers. Once we get down to 0.6 or below, generally the accuracy isn't that strong. Irritable bowel syndrome is likelier, or gas GI issues, etc. So this is what the first one is, and being aware of the patient, I know that it is pretty close match. So from the microbiome alone, with no patient history, nothing else, we made some predictions, and the predictions are, one could say, spot on, but they are pretty close. Now we can go back and look at the different one. Let's go and look at the daughter, and we find number of matches went down a little bit, and we have actually number of items 0.6 and above has gone down. We only have 3 sitting there. We have a half dozen on the other one, and there, and then the other ones are, well, alcohol intolerance for a child is not usually what you test. This is again based on the entire population. Some of the things seems to have gone down, which implies that perhaps sleep is getting better, etc. So that's basically. Now I want to flip over to something which surprised me, but after the conference on autism doesn't surprise me. Go over to mothers, And usually we suggest family be done because DNA is inherited by family, but also gut bacteria is inherited to a great extent by family. So what I wanted to do is take a look at the mother. And the mother, believe it or not, shows up as autism as being there. Her numbers is 14. Her child's are 19, 21. In other words, her bacteria is more like autism than a totally healthy individual. And as an FYI, when I first shipped this information back to her, she looked at it and she originally told me she was healthy. She's a good example. She looked at her symptoms and said, whoops, I have that, I have that, I have that, I have that. And the thing is, she had simply grown to accept them. So she never registered them as being symptoms because they were sort of always there. Just don't notice it. And seeing the bacterial results, she suddenly went on saying, oh, yes, those are symptoms. I have them, and perhaps my bacteria is why I have them, and I can do something about them. Type O positive, she was impressed of us picking that up from the microbiome. There's a physician, Peter Diadamo, who published a series of books about diet for the blood type a while back. If the microbiome can predict blood type, it also implies that diet for blood type actually has some probabilistic foundations to it, because the microbiome varies with blood type, and the diet to keep that microbiome healthy is probably going to be blood type sensitive. Again, a bit of an odd surprise, but it was sort of a nice one to come because it means the predictions of symptoms are, to be honest, unbelievably good. I was not expecting anything like this when I first put that there. I was just expecting, okay, let's see how it is. Probably get nothing but garbage coming out. And I have had a fair number of people almost say, mother of, they are accurate. They are so extremely accurate. May not be. I was expecting far less accuracy than is being reported back to me. Okay. So we now have that autism seems to be a regular pattern. But now let's go over and let's go and look at the very last sample there. And what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to change over back to the page there, and I'm going to go over to my biome view, which goes and shows the bacteria in the hierarchy which you have and the relative compared to everybody else in terms of samples. So we have all of them there. As you see, there's pages and pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of bacteria guaranteed to overwhelm you. But we're not going to do that. We're going to look at specific ones. Blottia is one of those. So I'm going to look for Blottia on the page, and there I find it. And I'm going to put a tick mark beside that, indicating that I want to get suggestions based on the Blottia levels. The next one I'm going to skip Bifido and Lactobacillus because there's complications there, or at least I feel there's complications because it is up and down, and I'm just there. So Villanella is sitting here, and it's on high one. We could also mark its parent if we wanted to, which actually may not be a bad idea because I noticed some of the errors which I recognize from the first paper, like the aster there. And next we go and look at the last one which we have on the list. And we have a low of here, so I'm going to mark here. You can mark all of those in a hierarchy if you really feel like it. Once we have all of those which we are particularly interested in, we could go up and create a custom suggestion profile. What that means is it takes only the information from the bacteria we select, and from those ones we could put it through a artificial intelligence engine to get suggestions of how to change the diet to correct those shifts. All the other shifts that are there we are ignoring intentionally because we don't know if they are significant or not. The bacteria on the list are the ones which are more probable to be significant for symptoms and severity of symptoms. So those are the only ones we could concentrate on. So we create that. Takes us back here. And if you go down to the bottom, you'll see we have a bunch of 4 buttons sitting there. We can click View Handpick Taxa, and we'll show you the values, your value, mean, and the range values, etc. So it's there for quick information. And what we could do is go over to Handpick Taxa Suggestion, which we see we have it picked there. And what we have is we have on the right a list of things which modify the microbiome. Antibiotics, antiviral do, drugs do it. We want to go down and we have things which are not classified, prescriptions do it. So we could exclude stuff which generally requires a doctor's prescription, because you could have a hard time persuading doctors to give you just antibiotic for autism without published studies, and there are no published studies at the moment. And we are going to go and we're going to ask for a very big list. And I'm going to exclude buying sources. I'm going to say include probiotics there. And I'm going to say if we have information about a child of the bacteria trying to modify, let's include that. And also doing inferred by association. There's some bacteria we have no information about what modifies it, but we do know that those bacteria goes up and down in agreement with a different bacteria. So what we do is we find out what modifies that other bacteria, and by inference, hopefully bring up the bacteria which we know nothing about. So we're basically doing inference. So we get all of those ticked. You can play around to your heart's content. I did 30 and 30 for illustration purpose. It goes over. Notice that I do it in a new window, and the reason is so you can play around, try a different one, and you have all of your different suggestions side by side. So we have items to increase, or we have a particular probiotic to increase. Note it's not lactobacillus or bifidobacterium. It's Enterococcus. Amino acid, vitamin D, hermosis, and we go down slippery M, saccharin, protein. Now, these are things which increases the specific bacteria or decreases specific bacteria which we're trying to alter. Some of them may have impacts on medical conditions, philosophical beliefs. If you're a vegan and it says beefsteak, you're probably not going to do that. These are suggestions, and what the suggestions are nothing more than suggestions, things you may want to try. Probability estimate reflects how many studies indicated that iron will increase particular bacteria. So if there's only one study, it has a low probability estimate. If there are many studies, it will have a higher probability estimate. So probability estimates, the maximum weight is a 1.0, and then everything is scaled from that. Down below, we have the things that should be stopped, and sometimes you end up with surprises. For example, inulin, resveratrol, beta-glucan, fish oil are unexpected things for many people to stop. The problem is, while they feed the good bacteria, they also defeat the bad bacteria. Again, these are suggestions. They should be reviewed by your physician, and then a selection made. Generally, things to be decreased or stopped are things you probably want to try to avoid if you can. We have a whole bunch of probiotics on that, which makes it very easy because we can just simply avoid those probiotics. And then what we have down below is the probiotic list, which are ones which has no known risk of a bad impact against the specific bacteria which we have selected. So we have bioflorin, which is the Enterococcus facilis. There it has a big impact. We have probiotic free, which is available on Amazon.com. Bioflorin comes from Germany and it's harder to get hold of. If you're in Spain, we have other ones there. So you have what will likely help. Down below we have mixed impact. That is, it will help some bacteria and hurt other bacteria, but the problem is we have no idea of whether or not the net benefit is good or bad. Generally, mixed impact you usually want to avoid because you're taking a chance that they'll do more good than bad, and we know they will do some bad. After that, we end up with negative impacts. These are ones which, they will encourage bacteria to go the wrong direction. And then we have those which have no known impact. None of the information we have matches up with these bacteria. So if you're doing them, you can keep doing them. If you're not doing them, there's no motivation for you to do them unless there's other medical reasons. Then we end up with food suggested. Sometimes you get some interesting mixtures. For example, barley is high in beta-glucan, but at the same time, barley is not recommended. And there comes out the fact that we are putting in facts at the level that studies report. And studies don't always report everything, which means we are dealing with fragments of information which often will come to contradictory results. Down below, then we have flavonoids. We see iron sitting there, zinc, vitamin D. Generally, D3 is what's just always. Folate, proline, amino acid supplement. And in some cases, if you see an unfamiliar word, click on it, and it will take you over and give you a list of what food has it. For example, peanuts has it. I know for myself, dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome, peanut butter was something which helped me greatly, and probably because it was providing me with proline as a amino acid. Barley also, nowadays I use barley mainly and not peanut butter, and I'm still getting my proline from it. So, going back, we now have that. There's some comments at the bottom about contradictory symptoms. But what we now have is we have come up with a list of things to increase or take. And we see here barley and oats is there. But we also see beta glucan, which is in those there. So it's sort of a bit of a toss-up. Try one or the other, and just be aware that the effect may not be exactly as expected, or you can keep safe and just take things which are absolutely clear, like iron supplements or food rich in iron instead. Now, if you're interested in what iron changes, you can click here, and it will go and gives you a list of things which it will do, things which it potentially will impact. And here we have the list of bacteria. 1,000 different bacteria is impacted by iron, and it's somewhere in those 1,000 are the bacteria which we have here, and the impact is always shifting things in the right direction without exception. So that's how we end up doing it. We do a lot of data matching. Okay, now I think that is basically it. You can download all items as Excel file if you want. You can have more or less items, but that's basically is a full cycle of the first post with this particular person. This again is absolutely specific for the person. We are using their latest sample and we handpicked from it. We could also go over and do it with a naive algorithm which simply tries fixing everything based on different criteria. Usually I prefer handpicked because it is as targeted to the critical shifts as possible. Other types of picking, you end up tossing more things in, and some of the things you're going to try changing may not be relevant at all. So that's where my logic is. And at this point of time, I think I'm done for post 2.